Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hour of Healing, where each week we have thought provoking and life changing conversations on topics that are engineered to bring us healing no matter what aspect of life we are in. Friends, we got another good one for you today. And joining us again is Reverend Denzel Ajimai Prempe. Friends, if you've been following us, you know he is a friend of the show and has been here by the grace of God, teaching us how music impacts our life in various ways. Again, Reverend Denzel is a pastor and a Ghanaian gospel musician and also the founder of Heartbeat Music. He's a dear friend of the family, and he doesn't want me to do a long introduction, so we will end it right there. Reverend Denzel, back to the show once again.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here and for us to share. And I think that it's a joy for us to learn what God has for us, with respect to our lives and what we ought to know. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And I know it's a very busy season for you around this time of the year. So we will get right into it so we don't take too much of your time. But friends, we're talking today about compromise. Compromise. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Compromise have been defined in various stratospheres as a settlement of differences between two people. And whenever I hear the word compromise, unfortunately, I think about someone letting go of their integrity and being in a position of harm. But I don't want us to confuse compromise with sacrifice because I think there's a huge difference between these two words. Whereas compromise always involves two parties, sacrifice usually involves one person always doing or giving up something important to them or valuable to them in order to satisfy another person. But what do I know? Let's get Reverend Denzel on board so that we can start getting into all these questions and conversations that we could have day in and day out. So, Reverend Denzel, how would you define compromise for us? And let us get into some of the short-term gains of compromise and also the biases that can also be factored in here.
Well, I think that, before I define it, I think that most people associate with the negative connotation of compromise.
True.
Compromise can also be positive.
Mm.
So, in the sense that I'll give you an example. If I am married and my wife wants me to wash the plate, and I am a typical person who has been trained, how we go about things the African way. It's like, this is the woman, you're already laughing. We've not even defined it, you're laughing. It's the woman that most of the time, that is known to be washing, doing those things and all that. But then those things tend to, bring a lot of intensity at home. The fact that you're able to, one, forgo what you would call sacrifice, but you're compromising what you know for the promise of a longer lasting marriage, it's also a compromise. So it's a positive compromise. So I always say to love very well and to love fully, there is something you must almost compromise. However, that is the positive aspect of compromise. Now, the negative aspect of compromise is when there is a promise over your life, and then you forgo that promise to please another person. That's where the negativity of compromise comes in. So I am compromising the promise over my life just so I can please you. Then that is the negative. So it's like I am forgoing my integrity, my principles, just so I can be your friend. I am compromising my principles. That I am not sacrificing. That is compromise. So normally compromise has a negative connotation, but I say so. For me, compromise would be either anything that you forgo that can have some form of effect on you, either negatively or positively. In the positive sense, sometimes we'll call it a sacrifice, but there are some sacrifices to which are deadly sacrifices and not necessarily positive. So that would be my definition of what I believe compromise is. Anything that can affect you, in other words, negatively which is mostly what we know. Anything that can affect you, it can affect the promise that you hold dear, it can affect your principles. That is a compromise, But I like to always put a positive one to it too. So, yeah, I'll jumble it there, and any people can think into it. It's always an end.
Absolutely. So compromise is not always a bad thing.
I
So then, Reverend Denzel, let's go right with that and say, how do we distinguish between the compromising in situations where it's for good? I know you gave the example of the marriage, which is very typical
yeah.
for those of us who grew up in the manly society, we call it, and so, what are some of the ways that we can distinguish the bad from the good compromise?
Anyway, so for me, it's very clear. I mean, let me just use what we've studied in terms of moral, not talk about the Bible yet, But as much as that is my source and that is my daily principle and guide, I'll say this: anything that would affect your moral principles, your spiritual principles of living, is negative compromise.
Mm,
Anything that would push your moral upbringing and your spiritual upbringing, then I can call it positive compromise. So to distinguish between the two, it's anything that would affect the promise of God over my life is a compromise. Anything that which is negative, anything that would increase that my understanding of the things of God, so is also a compromise that might be good. For instance, if I let go of a job so I can honor God very well, I am letting go. You can call it sacrifice, but then it's also a compromise.
true.
Yes, so that's those are some of the clear distinctions you can have, and so you can therefore, as it were, cascade it into various forms of things in our lives. And so, for instance, I'll give this typical example. You want to get somewhere in life, you have a friend who has a negative influence, but yet still, because you grew up with the person, you still love the person. Now the person is involved in negative things, and where you want to get to, if you associate yourself with that negative thing, it will affect you. So question is, are you going to compromise your friendship to get there, or you are going to compromise where you want to get to maintain the friendship? Two
Mm.
scenarios. Choose you this day whom you will serve.
Yeah, I think you make mention, or you touch on a few key principles there. One, that is the goals or the priorities of the parties involved, and then if I'm following correctly, you also talk about matters of ethics and safety and eternal future. That
Exactly.
if something will enhance your eternal future, then that is a good compromise. Thank you so much for that. By the grace of God, we will be unpacking these two or three principles that you mentioned as
Awesome.
we go through this section today. So, to start with, I would say then, how does compromise impact one's spiritual and personal identity? How does that concept of compromising impact us?
Thank you very much. The Bible says in Galatians, I'll use Galatians 1:10. It says, am I now trying to please man? Or
Mm,
am I now trying to please God? If I'm trying to please man, then I'm not
mm,
a born servant of Christ. And the
mm,
Lord is not. Right there, are you going to compromise the promise of God over your life because of pleasing man?
mm,
So there's a negative influence over your spiritual life. Now, to the physical life, anybody you try to please, anybody who does not appreciate you and you go above and beyond, and that's what normally we call sacrifice, but above and beyond to the extent that now you are not paying attention to your family, you are not
mm,
paying attention to the assignment that has been given to you because you want to please a man. What happens is that you put your trust in that man. Physically, it gets to you. You begin to get drained, depressed because the person is not appreciating you that way, and then so that's a compromise that has a negative effect on you as a person, and then spiritually to entice you down. So what happens is you are replacing the promise of God with the promises of men.
mm, mm.
And so, compromise, when you split the two, comes from the word promise. Every compromise takes away a promise. It's
Wow.
either a negative promise or a positive promise. Mind
Mm,
you, the devil gives promises as much as God
mm,
gives promises.
true.
So, in
True.
other words, a man can also give promise, and also spiritually, you can get promise from the spiritual realm. In terms, with respect to us, when we're serving God, we know there's a promise, and every promise has a condition attached to it.
Mm,
The gift is free, the grace is free, the mercy is free. But every promise, example, if my people who are called by my name would
mm,
humble themselves, then, so it's an if then clause. The little philosophy that I read will let you know that's what we call conditional clause. So if this happens, then that happens. So in ethics, if you go by these principles, you achieve this. As in the medical field, if you follow these things, you are able to tell the symptoms and you're able to prescribe a drug, and you're able, once you compromise the symptoms, you prescribe the wrong drugs, and
mm,
then you probably would exacerbate the issue that the person came with you with, and so it's anything and everything we do in life has a promise attached to it.
mm,
The question is, do you want to get to the end of the promise, or you want to compromise?
mm, mm,
And
mm,
so that's how it has an adverse effect on us as human beings, and in our spiritual life and in our physical life. And I like to cite the example always of relationships. If I want to keep my home, God has given us principles of which we can keep our home, and even morally, there's a way to keep your home.
mm,
Even if you are not a believer or a Christian, you know that there are certain things I can't do, and certain things I cannot to do. And if I do
mhm,
these things, I know I'll have this peace of mind. If I don't do these things, so question is, what are you willing to, in quotes, sacrifice for the promise? What are you willing to compromise to lose the promise?
mm,
So
mm.
yeah.
And I know we've mentioned the word compromise and sacrifice a lot so far in our conversation. So I will try in my small knowledge to distinguish that in simple terms for our listeners, because to me, like I said in the beginning, when we talk about sacrifice, you are meeting the person all the way. You going the whole way to meet someone or to be at the expense of someone. Whereas in compromise, I see it more as there is a middle ground where you are. And I think that is where it gets tricky because in compromise, most of the time, in my humble opinion, that is, it doesn't always start with giving up everything right away. It starts with giving up little things or small steps that eventually leads to letting go the entire promise. And so, Reverend Denzel, as you saying, what I was thinking about is if, as we sitting here, someone comes to us and say, "Hey, give me your integrity or give me your entire being," as you were talking about family or keeping the home, for instance. If someone comes and say, "Hey, give me your marriage and I will give you $10,000," you're gonna say, "Absolutely not." But then, what if that person comes and say, "Hey, let's keep in touch. Let's start talking frequently." And so you start with text messages, and then it becomes late night calls, and then it becomes longer video calls. And so by the time you realize you've drifted and away, as you were saying, you've given up on the promise completely. But I think compromise becomes very tricky for us these days because everybody wants to give up something, but like you asked, what are you giving up in
Yes.
order to keep the promise? So I think that is very powerful. But if I was,
But let me add a little bit. The real truth. If you look at the two definitions, compromise has got to do with the morality and human beings and how we relate. Sacrifice has really got to do with the divine,
mm,
offering animals or something in a religious setting. So when it always comes to sacrifice, we have in modern day used the word such that it's been watered down to
mm,
look like it's compromise, giving up something for
mm,
another. That's compromise.
mm,
But
mm,
then sacrificing and offering a life or something, as it were, of worth to please a deity, that is
mm,
sacrifice.
mm, True.
So unfortunately, we have used this word in our words, in our daily activities, that it's become seemingly the same, but that's not. If you look at the etymology of the word sacrifice,
Mm,
sacrifice has got to do with is like offering, as it were, animals or plants or something to please a deity,
mm, mm.
and then compromise has got to do with forgoing a certain principle. So going the long way, an extra mile, is I'm compromising. I'm not necessarily sacrificing because I'm not offering my life.
Mm, mm, mm.
So in our state, if in our state as human beings, if I go and put my life under the guillotine so that you can go free, then I have sacrificed myself,
Correct.
because I'm offering myself as a sacrifice.
Yes.
But however, you can transpose compromise into a religious life, but you cannot necessarily transpose sacrifice. But then, because the concept means the same as forgoing something, it makes
Mm,
it. I mean,
mm.
if you can pull up a dictionary now and try and look up the word sacrifice, it will let you know, and you realize that it's got everything to do with. So, and again, as much as we are using the concept of forgoing something for sacrifice, has to do with deity, where compromise has to do with relationships.
So, according to, and I'm reading from the Webster Dictionary,
Okay.
it says sacrifice is the act of offering to a deity something precious. And the second definition there, it says that is the distraction or surrender of something for the sake of something else. Those are the two
So the
main.
second part, so when you get through all the dictionaries and you really look at the etymology of the word, it's a deity thing. But again, the second definition makes you know we've transposed that concept of giving up
Correct.
something for another. And if you
Correct.
look at the word compromise, if you can pull that up too,
Yeah,
because I want us to
absolutely.
get this so that we can, as it were, make some statements out that people understand where we are coming from, so they don't say, hey, these people are getting the concept wrong. We understand, but we're letting you know the transposition that we have made, as we the Gen Zs. Don't be fooled by this gray hair. We the Gen Zs, how we have transposed some of the words. So compromise, what does compromise say?
Yeah, so in the Webster, compromise is settlement of differences by arbitration or by consent reached by mutual concession,
Mutual
or
consent.
something intermediate between or blending qualities of two different things.
So between blending qualities of two different things. So definitely, what is happening is this is different. This is different. Okay, where do we come to a middle ground? So we are
Correct.
compromising to come to an agreement. That's compromise.
Correct.
That's why I use the marriage example. But when it comes to sacrifice, it is I'm giving up something totally for another thing. So for instance,
Absolutely.
if I give up being a vegetarian because I'm going to get married to someone who is not a vegetarian. So now I'm going to start eating meat. I have totally given up. I've sacrificed my non eating of meat, by the way, for one who is eating meat because I love the person. So there I have sacrificed, I've not compromised.
Correct.
Now, when I
Correct.
compromise, yes, when I compromise is where the person who eats who only eats veggies, and the other one, I eat veggies, I'm a vegetarian. The other one says I eat only, I'm a carnivorous person. I don't even like vegetables. I eat only meat. Now we say, okay, because we love each other, eat a little bit of my leaves or my vegetables and the meat, and I'll eat a little bit of your meat and your vegetables. So we are both doing the same thing because we want to come to an agreement. That is a
Correct.
compromise.
Correct.
So now, at the end of the day, a compromise brings equal terms. So what is happening is you are eating both meat and vegetables. I'm eating both meat and vegetable. We were not eating. I was eating only vegetables and you were eating only meat. But now we are both eating the same thing because we love each other. The love
Mm.
becomes the key factor of the compromise, and the giving up to embrace something is what is a sacrifice. But when it becomes one party just foregoing, I love you, and if you love me and you also love me, then you are saying, okay, I'm not ready to give up my meat. You give up your vegetables and come and follow my meat eating because you love me. Then if I do that, I have sacrificed my vegetable eating for meat eating, because the key thing that coerced me, or as it were confronted me, was love. And most of the times that's what happens when it comes to sacrifice and compromise. It's always what I want and what she wants, or what they want, what we all want. And so once we come to an agreement, we've compromised. If we don't come to an agreement and one person leaves the other and comes to, then he has sacrificed.
Yeah, so thank you so much for elaborating on that, because I think those are very, very key to our conversations and helping our listeners be able to follow where we're going. I think the last bit there that you talked about, you kind of, in a way, talked about when compromise goes too far. I think one of the things I got from it is that as we are talking about, it can start with a good intent, but then it can go too far. And so I think it's very important that as individuals in a relationship, we're not talking about sensual or marital relationships per se, but in a relationship relating to one another as individuals, we always have to reevaluate the reason or the purpose for why a compromise was struck in the first place. Because if we don't evaluate, then in your example, if we both decide, okay, I'm going to eat a little bit of meat, you're going to eat a little bit of veggies, and then I don't occasionally or frequently reevaluate that agreement, before you know it, I had forgone completely eating vegetables, and all I'm doing is eating meat. And at that time, based on what Reverend Denzel is helping us to understand, it's no longer a compromise, because you have given up entirely on what made you, and now you are sacrificing, which is not, or which was not, the intent of
Yeah.
the agreement or the partnership. So I think evaluating and adjusting is very, very important. But my question then, Reverend, is that, is there or are there alternatives to compromise that can be more effective in certain situations? Because as you helping us understand, it's very necessary for us to be able to compromise in certain situations, because there is a good way to compromise, as in marriages, and then there's a bad way. So, are there situations where an alternative to compromise can be or will be more effective?
Well, if first of all, life is full of compromises. Any day, every day we wake up, we are compromising something for the other.
Correct.
And when God, by God's grace, I wake up and I decide that I'm going to get up from bed, I'm compromising staying on the bed to go to work. As many people are. That's why we have people who are lazy. They don't want to do anything. And so when you say a better way to compromise, the only thing I would ask is, what again, you made mention of reevaluate, and that brings me to the point of motive. It is your motive that informs you as to what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, how, if I understand it, how I phrase it is, what are the best ways to be able to arrive at a compromise, if
True.
I get it that
True.
way. And I think that will be one. Communication is key. Having constant communication,
Mm.
not holding back your thoughts, especially when you don't have an understanding of something and probably you misinterpret it. I'll give you an example. Like, for instance, some time ago, when I was a little younger, and in my marital state, you wake up and you sense that, your wife is not really happy. She's going about it. As much as she's going about her duties, probably, she walks a little bit, then she'll close the door and it becomes a loud noise, and it's like you're asleep. You're like, so what is going on here? And so you wake up and you're like, babe, are you okay? Is everything okay? It's like, yeah, everything is okay. But you can sense that, no, this is something wrong. The thing you can, so question, if the other party is not communicating what is, I said question, a statement here, if the person is not communicating what is going on, but you have noticed it, the extent to which you go to try and unravel what is going on,
Mm.
you can term it anything, but whether it's investigative or it is sacrifice, the thing is that you want to come to a piece of mind. You want to come to a place where that thing that is troubling you is not there. So there you are making a compromise on your bed, because somebody will say, you know what, okay, if I've asked you, if everything goes okay, I'm not talking about it, then okay, that's okay, then that's it. But the fact that you are persistently, consistently asking, so I'll give you one of those scenarios that happens, and I'm asking, oh, they say everything's okay. Yeah, I'm okay. Then once you know that answer comes, yes, I'm okay. You know that no, this is not this. I'm okay is not. Oh yeah, I'm okay. There's really nothing wrong. There are two different things.
Correct.
Babe, are you okay? Oh, I'm okay. Oh no, no, that means I'm okay, but I'm not okay. If you decide to ignore that communication sign right there, beloved in the Lord and brethren who are listening to me, you will find yourself in deep troubles. But once you identify that and you are able to communicate it out in your brain that there's something not going on well, now the onus lies on you to say, I'm going to persist to get her to speak or him to speak. Once you get the person to speak and the person brings out his issue or her issue, and you say, "Oh, I'm sorry. That's not how I saw it." Okay, then you have spoken about it. You've come to an agreement. So communication is key, right there. You have compromised your ego, which would have said, "I have asked you, and I asked you once, twice. You didn't say anything." Okay, that is a compromise. You have not sacrificed. You have compromised because you want peace. And for those of you who are married, you understand what I'm talking about. Because you want the peace, and sometimes you crack jokes about the situation so that you can have the peace. It's all in communications. And it's all in communication. The kind of communication you have and the way you go about things, and when, the how, and where you say it has a very, very important role in playing when it comes to compromise, and also when it comes to arbitration and solving issues. Because anytime you don't come to an agreement, which is a compromise, there's always conflict. So compromise is the bedrock of making sure that conflict does not escalate. So immediately we can't come to an agreement. That's why in the definition it talks about arbitration. Arbitration is talking between two parties to come to an agreement. Immediately there's no agreement, there's no compromise. So for instance, in a divorce, they go to a divorce court, they sit down, they talk about it and say, "Oh, you give me the car, you give me the car keys, you give me the chopsticks. I want this." At the end of the day, what are they doing? They are coming to an agreement. They are making compromises so that each one of them can have their peace of mind. If both of them had communicated what they were going through, they will probably not be sitting in a divorce court and saying, "Give me the chopsticks and give me the car key." Communication, one of the most powerful. And then motive of doing something affects your compromise.
Correct.
Your motive. For instance, if I know I'm married to a lady who is earning billions of dollars,
Wow.
and one day she just says something I don't like, immediately I go to the law court and say he abused. Here they can, in where we are in this part of the world, they can use any phrase. She abused me verbally, and because of that, I'm going away, and I want the settlement. And the settlement, I want that house. And your motive has always been to get that thing which was. You probably never came into that. But at the end of the day, your motive is affecting what you want to do and is bringing a compromise. So my mindset can push me into doing things. And then when it pushes me into doing things, we have to come to a compromise so that you can appease me. So compromise has to do with appeasing somebody. So I believe that the scenarios are always different. So I cannot say that there's a better way of compromise. But the only thing I can say is that communication is very important when it comes to reaching an agreement. Yes.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that. I think right in there you basically did show us that compromise actually can be a valuable skill that we need to pursue, or one can pursue. But I guess what I was trying to get at with the question is that whenever we talk about an agreement, there is an inherent risk that the parties take. So I guess the question then is, how do you, as a person, or how does one assess this inherent risk in the agreement that you're doing, in order to know if there is a better way to get to that agreement? So
Well,
that
that's
was
where
really what the
that's
question was
that's a
about.
good question. That's where self-preservation comes in.
Correct.
At the end of the day, everybody goes into an assessment or into an agreement because it will benefit both parties.
Correct.
Now, when there's a breaking of an agreement, or as it were, when it comes to the fact that we have to evoke and revoke and invoke the contractual terms of the agreement, then it means somebody has broken the rule or broken the agreement. Aha. So how do you assess the risk as a person? If I'm driving at 50 kilometers per hour or 50 miles per hour, and I know that I'm supposed to drive 35 miles per hour, what is the risk associated with it? Being
Speeding
stopped by
tickets.
the police and given a ticket. Now, the question is, how are you going to approach the risk? It's either you go by the rules by driving the speed limit or go in excess and get the speed ticket. So it's either speed limit for speed ticket or and then once you are probably arrested by the police or stopped by the police, now you have two things: pay the fine, which is a compromise because you are accepting that I am guilty. You get some points on your license, your insurance premium goes up, or you go to court and go and defend yourself. Question is, how do you assess the risk when it's going to affect you in a way that is not going to be good for you? That is risk. And in risk itself, when you do a little bit of risk management, we call something positive risk and negative risk. So Hugh risk, and so you learn about risk. Luckily, I studied small in that area, so I have small understanding of that. So that's why we have risk managers in corporate institution or
Correct.
even in hospitals or in architecture. Anytime they're going to come out with a building, and with my little project management background, we assess the risk to know whether the venture we are going in will be profitable.
Correct.
So the question is, if the compromise will not be profitable to you, then it's risky. That's how you assess the risk. And again, that's why I said sometimes it brings out the selfish nature of man. When you begin to assess the risk associated with the compromise, it can either make you selfless or selfish. So it's either I'm going to embrace the risk no matter what it is because I want to probably let this person get to know that we love the person, or I am not going to. I'll give you an example. I go into the den of heroin shooters, and there's one particular person who is there who I love, and I don't want the person to be there. Because of that, I go and sit amongst the heroin shooters and I'm advising him in the midst of heroin shooters. But I'm coming from a place where when I was coming from home, I was probably fighting with my spouse. So already my mind is not at the right place because my spouse is probably saying, why are you going to the heroin shooters den? Because you know that place is a dangerous place. And you're like, but that is a friend of mine. I love this person and I don't want to go. Then I go and sit there. Already I'm going there with my problem to try and solve a problem. And in trying to solve the problem, the person sees that, but you are coming, you are trouble. Yeah, isn't it my wife? I came that I was coming to, talk to you. And oh, don't worry, take some of the heroin and shoot. So you have just compromised, your safety because you wanted to also win somebody from there. Did you assess the risk?
That's the question.
So the thing is, was it profitable or it wasn't profitable? And most of the times, we don't ask when it comes to life and when it comes to relationships, we normally don't assess risk because anybody who goes into a relationship with the head first is really not in the game of wanting to be vulnerable to love. I don't think that you went to marry your wife because you knew that when you give birth your babies will look good. No, you were only at that point in time you were probably thinking about your emotions, how you were feeling about her. Actually, when I saw this lady, she was brightening in my eyes. Look at how beautiful she is. So at that point in time, you didn't assess the risk that one day when she probably gets mad at you, she will open her mouth and diss you, or when you get mad at her, you also open your mouth and diss her. You didn't assess that risk. So the thing is, when it comes to relationship, it's very difficult to assess risks. But when it comes to anything that has to do with monetary value, oh, it is easy to assess risk. You understand what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
if I am going to work for a company and I'm going to work 9 to 5, and I know this is my value, and they are paying me this amount, I know that I'm undervalued. Number one, maybe the house I live in, the mortgage I pay, if I divide the salary they are going to give me, it won't even take care of grocery and mortgage and all those things. That is a risk you have to assess because there's monetary value placed on it. So most of the times, things which are without monetary value is very difficult to assess as risk. But things with monetary value is very easy to assess risk. The
Yeah.
time, we call it the time value of money.
Well, thank you so much for that, Reverend Denzel. But I will push it a little further because we ask the tough questions here because this is hour of healing. Because I think you are 100% right that things that don't have monetary value is very difficult to assess the risk. And so what ends up happening is that most of us don't assess the risk. In marriage, for instance, you talked about following just the emotions, but I truly believe that um, those things that don't have monetary value also certainly need to be thoroughly assessed before we get into it.
I agree
And
with
I
you.
think that is the problem or part of the problem that most of our generation face now, that we get into situations, we get into business, we get into partnership that doesn't involve money. And we say, oh, I trust this person, I feel good about this person. And so we jump into it. And it goes to what you were saying, for instance, that you did not take the time to assess the risk. Hello, dear listeners. Hope you are following this conversation. I don't know about you, my friends, but I am excited because the foundations have been laid and we are ready to take flight on this conversation. Compromise, not sacrifice. Remember, friends, that whenever we talk about compromise, we are shedding light on the agreement or the arbitration that happens through two parties in order to take them to the next level. We are going to end the part one of our conversation this week here. And by God's grace, we will be bringing you the concluding part of this conversation next week. Friends, you don't want to miss it because, like I said, we are taking flight. God bless you so much, and we will see you same time next week. Bye-bye.